story, and what informs credibility and authenticity? These are some of the questions that were put to a panel of young creatives at the VIP Youth Fest debate held in Johannesburg earlier this week. The youth panel included budding filmmaker Lebogang Rasethaba, a musician, writer, columnist and a feminist, Danielle Bower, and young South African hip-hop artist and rapper Sam Turpin. The panel was facilitated by Molefi, creative content strategist for Liberty Africa and Live Magazine SA, who joins us now to unpack the issues and what transpired during that debate. Lee, welcome back to Morning Live.
Thank you so much.
Okay, we're talking a little bit about who's telling young South Africa's young creative story. But
Right.
just give me a bit of a background. Why was this such an important debate to even begin to start it? How do you then choose the right catalyst to spark the right level of debate?
I think, first of all, that question is really, really important, not only in the sort of in the creative aspects of it, but for South African sort of life as a whole. June 16, for example, is a great example. June 16 is all about youth, right? It's Youth Day, but more often than not, you find people that aren't very young being the narrators of the young person's story. So importantly, that was a space, first and foremost, before we even begin to make any declarations. Importantly, it was a space where young people, a platform where young people could themselves define their story, who young people themselves could define the assumptions that perhaps exist about the young person's story, where young people themselves could be the catalyst of their story. That's the most important thing. What that story is, I think, is secondary. The primary thing is that it needs to be told by the young person first and foremost, and the first person that needs to be invited into that conversation needs to be young people, period.
Lee, I want to jump in here very quickly because I also think that it's a misnomer when we use the word young.
Sure.
I think often when we think young, we're forgetting that if you defy a youth, it's up to the age of 35.
Right.
And for me, when you consider that to be youthful or young, there are people with life experiences. How do we get... I don't want to say how do we get rid of the word young, but I do feel that young is misleading.
I agree. I like that you brought that up. I think also another thing about the term young is that it seems inherently, it seems to draw the inherent assumption that young people are homogenous, and that young people all think the same, or that young people have similar experiences, which isn't actually true. And again, brings us back to the fact that we need platforms such as this debate, where young people can be themselves the sort of the creators of their conversations, where young people themselves can reflect on their experiences of being young, long before we invite other people, who perhaps aren't young. Right? So
who doesn't fall in what that specification is?
Young is very broad, and not just in terms of age, but in terms of experiences as well. So somebody asked me a little while ago, do you think young people are hopeful for the future? And I was like, well, that depends on which young person you're speaking to. That depends on which young person in which part of the country, from which race, who's which gender. So there's a multiplicity of experiences of being young, and quite problematically to assume that young people all share the same experience is part of the problem. Rather, invite young people themselves, invite a wide range of young people on platforms such as these, so that young people can share their own experiences constructively and imaginatively, rather than sort of look at them as one large group with a similar experience.
And I think that's maybe where the fundamental problem is. How do you then, as the team that started this platform, choose the right catalyst to move that debate forward? Because you had a budding filmmaker, a musician, writer, columnist. You had a hip hop artist as part of that panel discussion. But I can only imagine that getting that mix right is very important. I think
you want as broad a range as possible, and you want people that can introduce the most difficult subjects as possible. I think a lot of the conversations, young people are on the periphery of conversations that happen in the countries. But I mean, as large a demographic as we are in the country, it remains that, a lot of the things that we talk about, a lot of the themes that dominate the life of a young person don't translate into mainstream discourse. So you want people who are bold enough to be able to sort of touch on themes that people often find difficult in the mainstream. So, for example, somebody like Danielle Bower is a feminist thinker, and that is something that you don't often have discussed in the mainstream, right? Sort of gender issues isn't something that you often have in the mainstream. She has started she works with a range of other young female thinkers on something called the feminist stockfile, and the problem is a lot of the time these sort of organizations, these platforms, kind of live outside of these kind of platforms which are national, right? But when we create spaces where conversations such as the conversations they have around gender and feminism and so forth can find a national platform, can find a mass audience, then we have conversations that thrive. Then we have conversations that really spark. Then we have new conversations rather than the same old recycled conversations that have been existing.
I want to ask you just a question. I want to touch on something that you mentioned. We talked about choosing a panel and making sure that they can introduce difficult topics or difficult conversations. Just give me an example of a difficult conversation that came up during this debate.
So something that isn't new, but that was approached in a completely new way because of who you have there is race, right? Race is extremely difficult. However, I think if anybody can discuss race and debate race in the most imaginative way and the best contextualized way in an actual lived experience, it's young people. So we had a debate on race during the festival, during the VIP Youth Fest, and again, absolutely everybody at the VIP Youth Fest who contributed was a young person. It was entirely a space for young people to reflect. And you have, questions such as, we had a lot of debunking of issues. So do young people still carry sort of a hangover of race? That was huge. That created a boom, right? And there were differences of opinion, but importantly, they were broken down. Importantly, they were narrated by the young person, first of all. And although I think we probably wouldn't have all the time to really discuss what came out of that debate right now, I think if you go onto our website, livevip.co.za, you'll find a lot of scenarios. You'll find a lot of anecdotes that are really sharp in that tone. Absolutely.
I want to touch on something, Lee, very quickly. That and I fully agree with you. The youth have to talk about youth issues,
right?
But the centers of power, or those people that provoke some kind of change, or the catalyst. And I'm not saying youth can't, but it needs to be in conjunction with whatever the senior community authority. Parties are. It needs to be a dual discussion between where the youth are of today and the kind of promise of tomorrow. How do we make sure that a platform like yours, it just doesn't end up being an opportunity for youth to vent, but the right people are not. They don't have to speak, but they have to somehow be part of the dialogue. They have to be in those forums. They have to listen to what youth have to say, because it's important. Imagine if an SABC was part of that discussion, sitting there, not even as a broadcast, but a senior stakeholder member was part of that discussion. How do we make sure that we create conversations that actually live on beyond a VIP experience?
I think young people definitely need a seat at sort of policy making and decision making levels as well. So I think they're not mutually exclusive. That young people simply need to speak to the people that make the decision making. I think young people need to be decision makers as well. I think young people deserve a seat at that level, and it's very important. I think that is the first step. That we have a conversation, that we have a dialogue, exactly, that we align, and then we need to get to a place where young people are trusted enough, where young people are credible enough to be able to sit at the highest level and engage.
How do we get that trust and credibility, Lee? Very quickly.
I don't think young people necessarily need to be out trying to prove. That they deserve it. I think, first of all, as the largest demographic, and so inherently, young people are inherently undermined, right? So we come from the base of always having to prove, that we do deserve a seat at the highest power. Let's
look at statues. Let's look at the 1976 uprising. These were young people that were so incredibly proactive then.
Right.
In statues, we saw with the roads issue, young people mobilized amongst themselves, and they were the ones who got rid of the Cecil John Rhodes statue.
Absolutely, and that again proves that if effective decision making can be made by young people. You actually, I wanted to use this 1976 generation itself as an example, which is celebrated today as an example of young people who were largely encouraged by their parents not to do so, not to get involved in politics, who were largely encouraged by their parents not to, not to take part in the uprising, but did. And ultimately, they're celebrated today. So we do need more confidence in the young person as a country. And I challenge people to get onto our platforms, to see the kind of conversations that young people are having on livevip.co.today or livemagazine.co.today. And I think a lot of people will be pleasantly surprised.
Lee, we're going to leave it there, but thank you very much for joining me and talking to us about the recently concluded VIP experience. It was called the VIP Youth Fest debate. That was Lee Molefi was the facilitator of the VIP Youth Fest debate, in which participants tried to answer the question, who tells the young South African story? And the youth panel included filmmakers, musicians, writers, hip-hop artists, and rappers from all spheres and all spaces and every corner of South Africa. And I agree with him. We need to have media focus on these interesting and very eye-opening discussions. Okay, let's take an ad break. We'll be back after this.